Welcome to this video on the history of UFC. The Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC, has become one of the most popular sports in the world, with millions of fans tuning in to watch the action-packed fights. But it wasn't always this way. In fact, UFC had a very humble beginning. In this video, we'll take a look at the history of UFC, from its early days to its rise to global phenomenon. In 1993, the first ever UFC event was held in Denver, Colorado. The concept was simple, put fighters from different disciplines against each other in a no-holds-barred fight. The first UFC event was a success, and it paved the way for a new kind of sport. However, the early days of UFC were far from perfect. The rules were minimal, and there were no weight classes or time limits. This led to some brutal fights, and many people criticized the sport for being too violent. Despite the criticism, UFC continued to gain popularity. In the early 2000s, new rules were introduced, including weight classes, time limits, and stricter regulations on the types of moves that were allowed. This made the sport safer and more accessible to a wider audience. The rise of UFC was also helped by the emergence of some of its biggest stars, including Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, and Randy Couture. These fighters helped to bring more mainstream attention to the sport, and the UFC started to gain a wider audience. Today, UFC is a global phenomenon, with events held all over the world. The sport has become more professional, with stricter regulations and a greater emphasis on safety. UFC has also become a huge business, with multi-million-dollar deals signed with broadcasters and sponsors. The UFC has produced some of the biggest stars in sports history, including Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, and Jon Jones. These fighters have helped to make UFC a household name and have inspired a new generation of fighters to take up the sport. In conclusion, the history of UFC is one of perseverance and determination. From its humble beginnings to its current status as a global phenomenon, UFC has come a long way. The sport has faced many challenges along the way, but it has always been able to adapt and grow. Today, UFC is one of the most exciting and popular sports in the world, and it looks set to continue its rise for years to come.